So from her earliest days, our next speaker knew that she wanted to represent her nation on the world stage, and did she ever. She studied diplomacy in Vienna and later went to Zagreb before being called into service. A very, very brave woman. She went to the frozen wastelands of Canada to start her career in diplomacy. I very super brave. My hats off to you. But from diplomacy, public service called her heart into politics, and she became Croatia's Minister for European Integration and later the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Croatia called her back to diplomacy and sent her to the world's largest economy as their top representative, the ambassador to the United States of America. Returning to politics, she attained the highest office in the land and became the 4th president of the Republic of Croatia. We welcome again to the WBAF spotlight, this time online, Her Excellency Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much, Andrew, for making the introduction. Your Excellency, I'd like to start with you about the challenge of business diplomacy. And what are the skills? In fact, what does it mean coming from business world, having to deal with diplomacy, and the reverse? Would you kindly talk to that for a minute?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much. And first of all, good afternoon to you all, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here today. And Andrew, I have to say you were a little bit harsh towards Canada. I actually loved the frozen landscapes and the cold climate. It was very healthy, I must say. And in the context of today's situation, I can't underline enough how much I wish to be in the same room with all of you, and I hope it will happen soon that we will be able to discuss all of these issues in person. Of course, when talking about business, diplomacy, switching back and forth in different functions, I have to say that, first of all, diplomacy has been part of human communications of interactions for centuries and centuries of any type of human activities, including commercial and economic activities. Let's just remember, for instance, centuries ago when traders and merchants on the Silk Road route had to negotiate the safe passage and the value of they were carrying with different states, with different systems and with different mindsets, I could say. And of course, diplomacy has always been associated with business and commercial activities. And diplomacy and such is something, it's an activity that enables peace and security, that contributes to conflict resolution, but also understanding, exchange of information, building networks and friendship among nations, but among many non-state actors today as well. As we know, and then as it was underlined by Andrew earlier today, globalization has really radically changed the international business landscape. And facing such multiple multiple challenges and complexities of the modern world, businesses, of course, have to adapt. Global companies require business competences in which most managers or employees have very little or no training at all. Businesses are facing multiple challenges of globalization in the modern world, but also, I would say, a decreased government role and function in assisting them in conducting work worldwide. There is reduced interest of governments. There might be a conflict of interest between individual companies and the government. There are reduced capabilities of embassies as everybody's downsizing and reducing the number of people who are posted abroad, which means fewer capabilities to assist businesses as well. So businesses have to balance in all this and develop their own capacities. And in an ever more global economy, the need for specialists who can initiate and maintain strategic conversations, conduct negotiations, and build relationships and strategic networks to the benefit of all involved has never been more imperative. Businesses need diplomatic capabilities and expertise to prevent potential conflict and mitigate political and other non-commercial risks and sustain success. But I would say most of all to build these positive relationships. So business diplomacy, as I define it, is the art, skill, and practice of creating and maintaining positive relationships across the world with a whole range of stakeholders, be them political or state or non-political, non-state entities. It's about creating alliances and shaping and influencing the environment and ultimately creating favorable conditions for the fulfillment of business goals. Business diplomacy is a way to constructively engage and negotiate with multiple business, but also non-business actors to mitigate geopolitical and commercial risks and influence actors within the global arena. I have to say that business diplomacy is different from other related terms such as public affairs, public relations, and lobbying. I would underline that business diplomacy is important for all. It has benefits for everyone, first of all, for private enterprises. In operating internationally, it has benefits for the government to adopt the so-called economic or commercial policies or diplomacy, and it has benefits for individuals who will be dealing both internationally and locally, but I would say also within their own organizations in conducting business diplomacy to navigate their own careers and professional paths.
Excellent. Could you share with us how you look at political risks, let me say, over the next decade? Obviously, this century, we've seen a lot of change, but let's say over the next decade, what are these political risks have changed compared to the, let me say, the past decade, and how businesses need to navigate differently in the next 10 years?
Well, absolutely. The political landscape is changing. I've mentioned globalization, so doing business internationally, but also there is the fourth industrial revolution, which has sort of shifted our life to the next dimension. And we need to use the benefits of industrialization and of technological development to advance our own businesses and national organizational and individual interests. The situation is rapidly changing. The pandemic is also one of the aspects that characterizes the 21st century landscape. But what characterizes us most is sort of multiplication of actors in the international community. They're not states and state organizations and international organizations any longer, but they're also individuals, groups, ad hoc groups, interest groups. And with the modern communications and the social media, practically every individual is able to disseminate any kind of information and news around the world. And if the companies and the businesses are not mindful, that can be very detrimental to their standing. We remember the so-called blackfish effect when a low budget movie about the orca whales really hurt SeaWorld, one of the well-doing companies at the time. So in order to mitigate those risks, the companies have to be actively engaged in assessing these risks that are not only commercial any longer, but are non-commercial, that they are geopolitical, but also depend on different interest groups, depend on what governments and different alliances are asking for, and that is respect for human rights, for instance, that is respect for certain agenda, etc. We have also seen sort of a dissolution or regressive multilateralism where universal norms are no longer expected. So we are dealing with sometimes with particular norms, with particular influences, with very particular values in certain situations. So we need to maintain our integrity in all of that, but we need to be able to navigate through those political and other risks and be able to reap benefits for our communities and for our companies. As I've said, we cannot expect much help from governments any longer, so companies need to be able to assess and evaluate risks, political and others. They need to be able to assess the actors of those risks, and they need to be able to build and maintain alliances that are sometimes centered around interests rather than values in order to be able to deal with risks. And all this needs to be incorporated in a long-term business diplomacy strategy, and of course needs to involve education of any particular member of the organization.
Thank you. Okay, how about negotiations? Now we know that it's you've indicated that businesses, of course, are facing new challenges. They cannot rely on state actors, and this is, of course, addition to the global factors and local factors and where they're operating. Negotiations, a subject very dear to my heart. What is kind of like your outlook and how people can manage their own resources? I'm talking management, like a leadership in the companies, to negotiate through this next process. How can they build those skills and develop them, please?
Oh, absolutely. This is a very pertinent question to the modern times, as I'm one of those proponents to look at negotiations as a lot more of a complex problem, that it has been defined by different theories of negotiations, where you, of course, have to prepare yourself, so work on preparation, work on the conduct of negotiations, the execution of negotiations, and the closing of negotiations. I think for successful negotiations, this is not that is needed. First and foremost is this risk assessment and acquiring information about everything that is pertinent to negotiations. Excellent negotiating skills take into account personal and institutional skills as well. And personal skills, of course, pertain to diplomats in general, but also successful negotiations that range from a degree of leadership qualities, of empathy that we need to find, but also different skills that include emotional and intrapersonal, but also social and interpersonal skills in dealing with others, understanding emotions and motivations and managing emotions and motivations of others, linguistic skills, conversational skills, in being able to form the argument, not just in negotiations, but overall when presenting your point of view, even for your personal benefit. And of course, the cultural aspects come into play, because in today's world, the differences between cultures, whether they be sort of geopolitical or religious or different types of organizations, are very important. And we need to understand and be mindful of that. And what comes into play is also protocol and etiquette, which most people think is just sort of a sideline kind of knowledge. But I must say that when it comes to protocol and etiquette, that a simple mistake like clumsy handshake, or addressing a person in the wrong way, or neglecting and hurting somebody's cultural feelings, can make the difference not only between the success of a business deal or the business deal being broken, but also can affect your own personal image, the way that it can start you off with a complete different presentation, and in turn can affect the way that you conduct these negotiations, where you lose not only confidence in yourself, but a certain degree a self-respect as well. So this is a very complex area where multiple disciplines come in.
Indeed. Do you have any closing statements that you would like to make? And from my side, this is all I've got. Thank you, please.
Well, absolutely. There are so many challenges ahead. So please do not forget the importance of strategic communications. There are not one-way communications and presenting your own views. Strategic communications today are a collaborative effort. They include strategic listening, empathy, taking account other people's views to a lot of public research and base your communications based on the wants and needs of the public. And of course, the overall effort is to present you in a positive light with your values and what you do and how you do it for the long term. And let's use the opportunity of the social media and social networks. It presents the opportunity to even those entities that are small in geography or the number of people. You don't have to be with today's world of all sorts of isolations. You certainly don't have to be and cannot be isolated virtually, because as I said, with a click of a button or a click of a mouse, you can disseminate information around the world. The news happens within an hour, and the response of most companies is a lot more than that. So we do need to be a lot more not just reactive, but proactive in communicating in what we stand for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Back to you, Andrew. Thanks, madam.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.